Helane, and it's really nice to see you in person for those of us in the recording studio. As part of your work in Japan, you're working with the Presbyterian Church. Where is that located?
So we're in East Kanto, which is sort of the east side of Tokyo and beyond. And that's actually our presbytery. We're located about, I think we're about an hour to the east of Tokyo. And then the church we go to is another half hour further east. It's in a place called Oyumino, which is a city district of Chiba City, which is where we are. It's a Presbyterian church, and the way it was set up in order to church plant was just the church plants that happened, which is part of the one church. So now there's 3 churches in different but neighboring parts of the city, Oyumino, Honda, Toke, and we all kind of function separately but also together. So when we go to session, there's 2 levels of session. One is just the site, the congregational site, and then the other session we have is all 3 sites.
And you are working over there with Australian Presbyterian World Mission as well as Church Missionary Society. You've been there for some years now.
Just over 8 years.
Over 8 years? Yes.
We were sent.
Yeah.
So this would mean your children are probably more au fait with Japanese way of life than Australian way of life.
In some ways, I think that's true. Like Ellie particularly, she went through Japanese, it's called Yochien, which is a 3-year preschool program and school through 1 to 6. And so our Japanese friends definitely say when they think of her as a Japanese girl, that she makes a lot more sense to them.
So tell us about your other children as well.
Albert was born here. So we were pregnant on our first home assignment. And 6 months after we arrived in Japan, was Christmas Eve. And Helane was in the hospital giving birth to Albert. Would you like to say anything about Albert?
Yeah, so he'll turn 8 this year. And then Ellie will turn, Ellie's 13 and Leo's 15.
Yeah, we were sent out Leo.
Yeah, so he spent the longest in Australia out of any of them, but still he's been in Japan longer than he's been in Australia.
Yeah. All our children, though they appreciate both Japan and Australia, they don't say, oh, we don't like Australia or we don't like Japan. If we talk to them about it, they can quite easily say, we like this in Australia, we like this about Australian school, but this other thing is better in Japan. Yeah.
And some might ask, why Japan?
That's a very good question. So the reason that we're here is so that people will hear about the good news of Jesus and the salvation that he brings to us. The church here is very small, and despite Japan actually having quite a long history with Christianity. I think the first Christians came in 1549. So if we're looking at Japan as a wealthy nation, we might say, well, it has medicine and it has education and it has all these things that it needs in terms of worldly wealth or material wealth. But in terms of the spiritual wealth that comes from knowing Jesus, there's very limited opportunity here for people to hear about the gospel, about what Christ has done for us.
Japan is less than 1% Christian. That means that most people won't have a chance to meet a Christian. And those people that do, they may not get a chance to hear the gospel and, get introduced to Jesus. And we just know that knowing Jesus, it gives you hope for this life and for the next life. And so we want more and more Japanese Christians to be ready to share the gospel and more Japanese people to have the chance to meet Jesus.
What are the big needs in Japanese culture that you feel the news of Jesus is really addressing?
I think one of the biggest stresses for Japanese people is relationships. The way that Japanese people communicate, there's a lot of ambiguity. And so people are often left guessing, how did that person take what I said and how did they feel about it? But we've had the opportunity to see Jesus transform relationships here in Japan. A good friend of ours, she listened to a sermon where the pastor was talking about forgiveness. And she straight away that day said to herself, I need to forgive my parents. And she called her parents and started talking to them about the things that were difficult. And that's really changed her family. And we can see that flowing onto other members of her family, other people that need to forgive other people. And the power for forgiveness comes through the gospel, because we are so forgiven in Jesus, we're able to forgive other people. And that has the gospel's having flow-on effects in her family. And we're just so privileged to be able to see that.
So what does a typical day in the Ramsay family look like?
Good question.
I tend to get up and get our kids up at 6 so that they can leave the house at 7 and get on a train around 7:30 to meet their school bus around 8. They've just started at an international school in Tokyo, and so they're commuting with all the businessmen on the train. If you see videos of people getting smashed in trains, that's almost what our kids are going through every morning for half now. And then Albert heads off to local school after that, and we get a little bit of time during the day to be able to get our work done. And so for me, that looks like preparing kids ministry materials usually, or meeting people that I'm working with in kids ministry.
Yeah, every week feels a bit different because my schedule changes a bit from week to week, whereas Helane has more of a regular schedule. And so work for me looks like preparing maybe a sermon or something else like that at my office in the front room of the house. Actually, it's interesting, that room, because everybody on the street can see me. So people will say to me, oh, yeah, I see you sitting there when I go past. And I'm like, oh, that's Adam. What's he doing there? That's funny. Or I'll go into the chapel where might be as a Bible study that I'm trying to lead but not lead, because I want some of the men in that group to become more confident in handling the Bible themselves. And so if I speak too much, the Japanese way of thinking is that you need to sort of let the teacher speak and the teacher do all the speaking. And so if I start speaking, it's very easy for everybody to not say anything else and just kind of agree with me or expect me to answer the questions. But if I say less, or I ask someone else to answer the question first, then that actually creates a space for them to do that.
You're still both doing language study?
Yep.
Yes, we have one language lesson each per week. And our language study these days is mostly centered around things that we are preparing for ministry. So I will go through either the passage that I'm working from for a sermon and talk about that, or the actual sermon script itself. We're quite blessed with an older lady who is a mature Christian and knows what's going on, biblically speaking. So she can be quite helpful for both of us as we think about how do we talk about whatever it is, but in not just in Japanese, but in a way that Japanese people will understand what we're saying. It's very easy to say something that we think makes sense to us as Australians, but has no meaning or even the opposite meaning for a Japanese person.
Challenge of cultural interaction.
Yes.
You're both very musical from my memory, and you've been able to use your musical gifts in Japan quite creatively.
Yeah, it wasn't how we expected. We went to Japan talking about all the concepts that we were going to do to create spaces for evangelism. We've done less of that, especially since COVID. But one of the ways God has used our music is that we write, together with a lady from church called Mummy, we write new songs for the kids ministry because they don't have very many. One of the things we like to do in our lessons is to theme the song to what we're trying to learn about. And you'll get to something like the Holy Spirit and you go, oh, we don't have any songs about the Holy Spirit because it's not one of the 15 that we might have to choose from. And so we just start creating something. And that's been a huge blessing. Moni sounds quite creative as well. And so I'll throw out a bunch of lyrics and some of them will be awful, but she'll pick up on an idea from something and then together we'll create a song. And we've got some great role models from Australia, like Colin Buchanan, who just have shown us how to create kids ministry music that's fun, that kids actually like singing.
Our kids ministry grows here. You might have to come and demonstrate some to us in Melbourne. So what does a typical Sunday look like for you as a family?
So I will go first on the train and I'll attend the first service, which is a little more traditional, and I might help out there in a variety of ways. Sometimes I might lead the service, not that often, but sometimes. After that service, it's about 10 o'clock, maybe 10 past 10, the kids' church will start, and it runs for 40, 50 minutes between the two services. And I mean, Helane can talk a bit more about that in a second, but then we run into the second service. And again, I'll help out usually with technical things if I'm not doing either the song leading or service leading or preaching. Just in my role in that sense, trying to support what's happening there during the services, help the minister and the elders just to fill in roles in whatever way that I can. Well, obviously trying to be, building our relationships with everyone at church. It is the day when we are able to be in contact with more people at the church. And so Sunday's a big time for that. I'm trying to kind of catch people afterwards. And the congregations are actually really great. They really like each other, which isn't a given in churches. And then after the second service, it's great, we're chatting and enjoying it, but really it's 1 o'clock and none of us have eaten any lunch yet.
Yeah, so we've got 3 main families that are part of the kids ministry. Their mums are the 2 core members that help me to teach at church. And so we have a rotation, and one person will be on preparing the games and the craft and everything, and the other person will be on doing the talk for the kids. And so we'll share a Bible story and then tell the kids what we think it means, and then, often get into small groups and talk about how to apply it to our lives. We've got a crowd of littler kids, so some 2 and 3 year olds as well, who are coming up. And so we're excited to see them get started on their kid ministry journey.
I do sometimes go to another church to preach, if I've got a sermon prepared. And it's quite easy for someone else who needs a pastor to come for the day.
Well,
typically, a lot of churches don't have pastors, small churches. And so I've been a few times this year to places just to preach. They may or may not know me. Or even in the churches that we are kind of linked to more closely, the pastors there sometimes swap, or they sometimes go and help other churches out. And this Sunday just passed, I did that kind of thing. I went to a church called Toke, which is technically we're part of that same church because it's a 3-site church, even though we're quite separate. So I went there and I preached, and actually I did the Lord's Supper in Japanese. And the funny thing about that for me is that's the first time I've ever done the Lord's Supper in any language.
Thank you for sharing your time with us today. And to set you a context for where we are, we've been having a mission lunch every quarter, and you are the final mission lunch for the year. So it's been lovely for you to join us by a Zoom interview. But what can we pray for you as a church?
Actually, a really big prayer point is for our children's education. Leo and Ellie have started a new school. They both had some difficulties with what they were doing before, but the new school is working out. So please just keep praying for them that they will continue to enjoy and succeed at their new school, and that they'll be developing good relationships with the other children there, good friendships. But for Albert as well, we're really hoping that he can also move to that school, but there isn't a place for him at the moment. The school has said if a place opens up, it's likely to be in December or next year at the start of the school year in April. So we just really would appreciate prayer that he would get a place at that school. He's in Japanese school and it's nice, it's friendly, but just he has some difficulties learning. And so he's behind in his reading and writing, both in English and Japanese. So we think moving him to this school is going to really help him it'll just be in English then, and it'll just make it easier for him.
So this weekend we're going away on a retreat with the other Sunday school people, and we're going to launch a new series that we started writing from Acts. This is the first time ever that we've been writing materials directly from the Bible without using some other resource as a foundation. And so it's very exciting to be able to do that with the ladies. And I'm really hopeful that we're creating resources that'll be worth sharing and that other kids ministries around Japan will be able to pick up and use as well. So just pray that nothing gets in the way of that and that we're able to create resources that show children God's truth in really fun and vivid ways. And also that the children motivated by hearing what God does through his Spirit, through the disciples in the book of Acts, that they would want to be part of God's mission, that he would bring them in, he would grab their hearts and move them by the Spirit to be sharing Jesus in their locations, in their schools and in their clubs and wherever God has them. And the longer term, next year is coming around, isn't it? And so putting together the calendar for next year and making sure that we say yes to the right things and no to the right things, so that we're spending our energy exactly where God would have us spend.
I was going to say, Christmas in Japan, what does it look like to you?
We try to have a candlelight service. We'll try to have a Christmas Eve service. And this year, post-COVID, there's sort of short-term teams coming again. And there just happens to be one in this area that wants to put on some concerts. There's a local gospel choir in the churches that will put on a concert. So those kinds of things, and trying to use that as an outreach. Whereas in Australia, people might still come on Christmas because they remembered going to the Christmas service as a child. Here, it's more about, okay, all the shops tell us Christmas is important and that we should celebrate it by buying stuff, but we don't know what it's about. And so they're often interested to come along to a Christmas event in the hope of understanding what this thing called Christmas is and being able to hear why it is that they're celebrating. But the really weird thing for us is that Christmas seems to move towards Christmas Eve, and then Christmas Day, it's all over. The Christmas things are on sale, everyone's at work. It's just a normal day for everybody. And that's really strange for us.
Yeah, all the merchandise is gone and it's immediately switched to New Year's merchandise.
Yeah, New Year's is very important here because of the kind of temple and shrine blessings that happen, both New Year's Eve and New Year's Day. So that shifts over straight away. And we're still stuck on Christmas Day.
Yeah.
Thanks, Adam and Helane. It's been lovely to get a sense of where you are and who you are for our people here. And we really appreciate being able to be linked into supporting you and praying for you regularly. So thank you.
Thanks, Lou. And thank you, Scots Church, for having us at your lunch. I hope it's delicious. We appreciate your partnership in the gospel for a world that knows Jesus.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.